So today's cardinal lesson, estate planning. And the first thing that comes to mind is taxes. That's what I got on the board is taxes. But let's first talk about just what estate planning is to me and what I'd like it to be for you. It is to have your things and your money passed to the people and the institutions that you want it to pass to. That's the first thing, is we need to make sure that whoever's supposed to get the money gets the money. And then, I guess second, we want to achieve what you want to achieve with it. I mean, some people really just think that estate planning is whatever's left, I want it to go to these people. But I've got this money, it's really for me in this lifetime. Other people look at it differently. They're willing to sacrifice and do without so that the generations to come, namely their children or their adult children and their grandchildren and whoever it is, that they're willing to do without while they're alive so they can pass on wealth to them. It's not my business to tell you how to do those things. It's really my business as a financial planner and estate planner to bring those wishes out of you and then put together a plan that's actually going to make things happen the way you want it to happen. And what we're going to talk about today is taxes and the estate tax. And people kind of fall with the estate tax into two camps, the way I see it. Is one camp thinks that the estate tax or the federal estate tax is something that everybody needs to worry about, and they're still planning their own estate, or maybe they're not even really planning, but they're just figuring it's going to work like it worked when their parents died. Which if your parents died back in this time frame and this time frame, and my father passed away before 2000, the estate tax exemption was $675,000 in the year 2000. So, that sounds like a lot of money to some of you. And then some of you, that doesn't sound like much money at all. And if you're a married couple, it actually, in 2000, it was double that. It was $1,350,000, which if you did it intelligently, you could pass that much to the next generation and not incur any estate taxes. Now, that really, I guess, doesn't sound like that much now, but you'd be surprised is that I have people come into me and they've either done estate plans in the past or they've done some light estate planning. And they said, oh, we got that already done. We did that years ago and we got the AB trust and we got things set up. But they were planning around this number when in fact they're still alive in 2022. Otherwise they wouldn't be coming in here, and they're in their 60s and 70s, and they're probably one of them for sure, and maybe both of them are going to be around for years to come. So we don't exactly know what the estate tax exemption, but if a person passes away during 2022, they can have $12,060,000 or $12,060,000 in their estate that's exempt from the federal income tax. So that rules out a lot of people passing away. And when you have a husband and wife, if you set things up properly, 24 million can be protected from the federal estate tax just simply by taking advantage of the exemption. So I really want to put you in the right point in time with this, but I wanted to demonstrate by this. This was just 22 years ago, and right in the beginning of this era, right after the new millennium, there was a new tax bill that came out that just greatly raised this exemption, but it did it over a number of years and all the way to 2010. And then when the new administration came in 2008, it was 2 million then, but it was already set to do this. And then they fixed it to keep increasing pretty much by inflation. And then when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed in 2017 to start in 2018, where they lowered tax rates, but as far as the estate tax, they doubled the exemption. So it's now gotten to, it's just the wealthy. So average people, even above average people, what are referred to as the mass affluent, people that have wealth, but they're not super rich, they still need to pay attention to this if they've got a few $1,000,000, but they don't really have to let this consume their planning, because even if they don't plan well, when the second person ultimately dies, if that happens in the next few years, there's $12 million that can be just exempt from the federal estate tax. So the way you double this amount is you can give an unlimited amount to your spouse. And there's a way through exemption, the portability, that you can preserve this at the first death. So in other words, if my wife and I, we have several $1,000,000 and I leave everything to her, which I'm going to do, maybe a little something to my kids, assuming that I die first, but we take advantage, we file an estate tax return and we take advantage of the portability of the exemption. In other words, you could protect $24 million. I'm not going to get into how to do that, but it's actually very easy to do. So a lot of people in that other camp, they get in their head, as long as I have less than 24 million, which is most people, or I could have 24 million by some point in time, I don't need to worry about this, okay? Well, you actually do, because this number is going to cut in half under the sunset provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I don't know, a lot of people forget that business, but Tax Cuts and Jobs Act reduces taxes in 2017. And in 2018, it took effect. You paid less tax for 2018 than you did in 2017, but it only lasts 10 years. So at the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026, the tax rates are right in the law now to go back to what they were beforehand. And the estate tax exemption is going to go back down to what it was, inflation adjusted. So it's going to be about $6 million. Still a lot of money. If you plan properly, times 2, it's 12 million. But there was talk in this tax revision stuff that they were doing last year in 2021, and it'll come up again, about lowering it even lower than the $6 million. So it may be headed back down into this department. Then there was also talk on the one hand of eliminating the estate tax. So you need to follow this, and certainly, or if you come to me and I'm helping you with your financial affairs, I follow it, and my whole team here does. And we're estate planners, and so when somebody has a significant amount of wealth, and this is a factor at the federal level, we have ways, and we can get you to attorneys and all the things. We do this in all 50 states and DC. We work mostly by Zoom now, which is kind of cool. We can do all the planning and things to at least lessen the federal estate tax for people that are fortunate enough to have a lot of wealth. And now I want to change it over to really estate planning for the rest of us, okay? So what's that all about? Well, estate planning for the rest of us are people, we don't have 12 million bucks or 15 million bucks or 20 million bucks. We've got less than $1 million, or we got 2 million, or we have 200,000. And then some people think when they've looked at those big numbers, and I'm not one of them, I don't even need to worry about it at all. Well, okay, if you want your heirs to pay a lot of taxes and have a lot of hassle, then you don't need to do any estate planning. But if you're concerned about that, because now I'm going to talk about what you do for the rest of us, is that most people, average, above average, mass affluent, whatever you want to call them, most middle class working folks, like I consider myself one of them, a significant portion of their wealth is in an IRA, okay? Or we could say half their money, even if 30% of your money is in an IRA, then that's a tax issue for starters in life. If you're turning 65 or in your 60s and that money is there, it's a bulk of money. And I mean, a lot of people coming in here, 80% of their financial wealth, they've never paid tax on it. And they're either going to pay tax on it in an intelligent way throughout their lifetime, or like a lot of people, they're going to, they're going to avoid taking distributions, just take the minimum distributions at 72. And then when they pass away, if their spouse is still living, they'll leave it to their spouse. The spouse keeps the minimum distribution thing going. And then when they pass away, there's a significant portion of their wealth is in an IRA. It goes to the kids, or the adult kids, and it is pre-tax. And so that's a problem. It's called the estate tax for the middle class, and it happens all the time. And what do the kids do? This is the first money to show up after somebody dies, okay? I mean, it's like when my mother passed away, the money that was in her IRA transferred by beneficiary. And I mean, we just sent the forms in. Once she sent in a copy of her death certificate, and they just send checks to all the beneficiaries, or they at least ask them, how do you want this? Do you want it now? Do you want to spread it out? And what do most people do with an inheritance when they're middle age? And that's what many of you have done. You say, well, how much taxes do I have to pay? Well, a lot. Well, how much is a lot? And you say, well, you do all the math, because you're going to add that whole distribution that's going to come to them in 1 year if they want to get at the money. It's going to drive them into the 40% tax rate, or 35% or 30%. So if this is of concern to you, this is an estate planning issue, is thinking about your IRA and who it's going to go to after the second one of you, if you're a married couple, dies, which is presumably the kids, and what kind of tax situation is that going to put them in? First thing I'm going to need to get out of you, does that matter to you? Or do we want to get on a plan for you to spend this money while you're alive so there's nothing left in the IRA? Or do we want to convert it to something? So this is the estate tax for the middle class, is the IRA money. Because ordinary income taxes are due to the beneficiaries. So it's really more of an inheritance tax than it is an estate tax. Now, capital asset transfers, what I mean by a capital asset, like your home is a capital asset. So now if your parents own a home, or you own a home, and you stay in there for your lifetime, and then you die, and that home, when you bought it, was $100,000, and when you die, it's $1 million, that has a $900,000 gain. If you sold it while you were alive, you were 80 years old, you wanted to go to a facility, a assisted living facility, or you just want to move to a senior, and you sold it for $1 million, I mean, you can exempt some of the growth of the sale of the house under the one-time exemption, the $250,000, but you're going to pay some taxes on the growth and value of that house. It's called capital gains taxes. But if you hold the home until your death, your heirs are going to inherit that with a stepped-up basis. So that home that's now worth $1 million, if they sell it right after that, they're going to get that whole thing tax-free, because the basis went from $100,000 to $1 million, if that's what it was worth, on the day you died. Same thing with stock that you own. If you bought stock at $50 a share a long time ago, and it's now worth $300 a share. You got a $250 a share gain that if you sold it while you're alive, you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes on the difference between what you bought it at and what you sold it. But if you hold it till your death and leave it to your children, they get the stepped up basis. So the tax code is very much different on capital assets, assets held outside of an IRA, and then money in an IRA. So what that calls for, if you're going to spend money, give money away through QCDs, give money to the church, you're going to do it from the IRA because the church doesn't have to pay taxes on it. You have to pay taxes if you want to spend it. And if you want to save money to pass on to your kids, it's much better to be a kid and inherit money outside of an IRA than it is to inherit IRA money, unless it's Roth. So there's a possible zero tax on sales of a capital asset, and that goes for a business too. So if there's a business, and we do this for a lot of family businesses where the older parents still own a significant part of the business. It's just the kind of the way it works, or a farm, or a small business, and then the kids work in the business, and they're just going to pass the business to the kids when they die, or part of the business or whatever. As long as the whole thing is under those thresholds that we were working with on the other side, we're good. But if this business is worth several $1 million, you need to have a meeting with somebody like me that does some business planning and some transfer planning so that we can avoid an estate tax. But if we're under those kind of thresholds, then if the business, maybe you paid very little for the business, or you just started it up and you've got an initial basis in the thing of $100,000 or something, and it's worth $4 million now, and then you die, your heirs inherit that business with literally zero tax because it gets a step up in basis. So this is a real benefit to middle class people and well-to-do people. This is a negative, is the taxes, the ordinary income taxes due. Now let's talk about state taxes. I mean, you've got two different kinds of taxes. One is an estate tax, the other is an inheritance tax. And you think, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that an estate tax is levied on the person's estate before it gets out of there and gets transferred to the heirs. The inheritance tax is levied upon the heirs. So, and there are several states that have an estate tax in addition to the federal tax, and many of these have them at a much lower threshold than the $12 million or the $24 million that I had on the other side of the board. Those are Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Washington, D.C. Then you have a few states that have an inheritance tax, and that's a tax for receiving money from the decedent. And that would be Iowa, Kentucky, Nebraska, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And, we work in all 50 states in the District of Columbia, and we're familiar with all of these. So if you want to do a general financial planning with us, that estate planning is part of that, we're familiar with these and know how to weave in and out of them and set up your assets in such a way that we can make them as favorable as possible. And then Maryland levies both. Maryland has an inheritance tax and an estate tax. So the gist of this whole thing is that your estate, it's smart to plan. Even short of the taxes, to really plan things out and write things down, get to an attorney, and get to your IRA and your 401ks, which have beneficiaries on them, and they trump the will that you do at an attorney. By trumping the will, they're just going to pay whoever it says on there. It's not going to go in the estate. But to really sit down with a professional, this is what I do, and go through everything you got, everything you and your spouse have, and then figure out, most of the time, it's all got to go to one or the other, and because just that's what you do with your spouses. But then figure out when that second one dies, who's it going to and how's it going to get there? What are your desires in that area? And this is especially complicated when you have different kids, when this is a second marriage and you've got her kids, you got his kids, and then they both have each other's stepkids. And a lot of people say, oh, we've taken care of that in the will. Well, okay. But, you know, what I do with people is sit down and have a conversation and figure out how they want it to happen. And if they've got some special money that they want to go to those kids, a lot of times we compensate with that with life insurance, just so that when that person dies, whether it's first or second in order, their kids get X amount. We may buy life insurance on both the man and the woman, and then just have the beneficiaries of that be the kids. Or vice versa with the assets. We may leave the assets to the kids that came into the marriage from their prior spouse, and then have the life insurance go to the spouse, so that that's something that started after the marriage. I mean, we've got an infinite number of possibilities. But so what I wanted to do is just familiarize you with this, and this is a service that we offer. I'm Hans Scheil, and I thank you for listening.